Good evening. I am so honored to be here tonight in the presence of so many brave peacemakers and the heroes behind the badge. As I was preparing for this evening, this night of honor, I was reminded that in life there are things that we have to do, and there are things that we want to do, and then there are those precious few that we get to do. And for me tonight, being here with you is a get to do honor. So thank you for having me. When I hear the word peacemaker, I automatically think brave warrior. Because we don't need a brave warrior where there is peace. We need a brave warrior where there is the risk of danger, where there is the threat of danger, where there is unrest, where there is something or someone who needs protected from danger. Brave warriors like you, regardless of the pressures against you, still run towards conflict and danger. You run towards unrest. You run towards others in need. And brave warriors like you, who regardless of the pressure that runs against you, you still act fast. You don't hesitate. You fight for what's right and what is just. And brave warriors like you, regardless of the pressure against you, still have a heart to protect and serve, a heart for reconciliation and justice, a heart for peace and a heart for people. Brave warriors like you know that it only takes one person to make a difference. And you make that your goal every single day. And brave warriors like you are not distracted by criticism because you know that for some people, the only taste of success they will ever get is by taking a bite out of you. And brave warriors like you know that peace is a contact sport, that it cannot be done from the sidelines or behind a camera or a microphone, or a news desk. But even peacemakers and brave warriors grow weary. I call it battle weary. But I think I have a word for you tonight that is going to bring peace and encouragement to you. I want to share a story about another brave warrior, one for whom the Bible scholars say was the greatest king of all times. But before he was a king, he too was a brave warrior. He came from humble beginnings. He worked for his father in the fields, protecting his sheep and tending to the animals. As a shepherd, he learned how to fight off some pretty vicious threats. And I'm talking about lions and bears as they tried to attack and eat his flock. He, like you, became very proficient with his weapon, and his weapon of choice was a slingshot. He wasn't only a sharpshooter, but he was also a very talented musician and poet. He was in training for greatness and didn't even know it, just like you. So, important lesson number one, don't despise small beginnings. Don't despise training. Often both are God's way of preparing you for something very big. So while he tended the animals in another region not too far away, there was a battle going on where his brothers were fighting on the front line. One day his father sent him with a care package to check on his brothers. And when he arrived, he noticed there was no fighting. In fact, there was a standoff underway. And in those days, armies would select the strongest and best soldiers to represent the entire army to fight one-on-one with the other army's selection, and best team wins. This opposing army had a massive soldier, a massive giant, who came down every day taunting and challenging his brother's army. But no one was brave enough to fight the giant. So the standoff went on and on and on. So You've likely heard this story. You've probably at least heard of the main characters. David was the young shepherd boy and Goliath the giant in the David versus Goliath story, which originated in the Bible. But oftentimes when we are facing a giant, we're referred to as the David, and oftentimes the adversary is called Goliath. So David heard Goliath teasing his brother's army, but couldn't understand what everyone was afraid of. I mean, he was used to fighting lions and bears. So this guy was ugly and big, but he couldn't understand what everyone was afraid of. So he said, I'll fight him. And his brothers went crazy. They were calling him names, calling him a stupid kid, that he needed to go home where he belonged, that he wasn't a warrior, he wasn't a soldier. Important lesson number 2. There will always be someone who doesn't see your worth. Don't let it be you. The king at the time, who should have fought Goliath himself, agreed to let David fight. So David picked up 5 stones and he ran toward the giant. Remember what I said. Brave warriors run toward danger. They fight for what's right. As David ran towards him, Goliath actually cursed David by his gods. And he laughed and said, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? He said, boy, I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. But David just kept running. And David warned Goliath, you came against me with your sword and your spear and your javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. He said, the God of the armies of Israel. Now I want to pause for a second, because armies imply more than one. And I think that's telling us that together you and God are always an army. There are a lot of armies. And this day, David said, the Lord will hand you over to me and I will strike you down. And David pulled out a stone from his bag. He hurled it in his sling and hit Goliath right in the noggin. Instantly, he fell to his death. The Bible says that he fell face first on the ground. Important lesson number 3. The world is filled with giants of all shapes, sizes, and speeds that will come against you. That will come against you. And while this may be a surprise to you, or it may be a shock when they attack you, it is never, ever a surprise to God. He's not up in heaven right now saying, what? You want to defund the police? Oh my gosh, I didn't see that happening. Or what? The police, the law enforcement officers are the villains? What? Oh, I wish someone had sent me that memo. No, God knows everything before it happens. In fact, if I could be so bold to tell you that sometimes God sends the giants to you to prepare you for something great he has in store for you. So you are trained. You are equipped. Stay focused on God. Stop focusing on media, on fake news, on crazy politicians who are grandstanding against you. You and God are a majority. You and God are an army. God said that David was a man after his own heart. David was hungry for God. He sought after God. He tried to please God despite his failures. Don't think David was perfect. We're talking about David when he was young. There was a lot that David did wrong. There were a lot of failures. But David proved over and over that he was a God chaser. So I believe you are men and women after God's own heart. And not everyone can say that. You see, God too has a heart to protect and serve. God has a heart for reconciliation and peace. God has a heart for justice and for people. Writing a book was never my plan. My plan or purpose is to lead millions to discover their purpose, their why. But as I share that one-on-one or with large audiences, the response is always the same. I really don't know my purpose. And the truth is, all of us have been given a God-given purpose, and God has fully equipped us for that purpose that he gave us. What I discovered was people not knowing their purpose was not really the problem. In fact, USA Today did a study of our entire country and went international as well, asking the question, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? And by far, the number one response was, I would ask God, what am I here for? What is my purpose? So my conversation with people about their purpose is always three parts. The first part is the true confession, which I've already shared. I don't know what my purpose is. And they'll often share their age. They'll say, I'm 75, I still don't know my purpose. I'm 45, I still don't know my purpose. Which quickly leads to number two, excuses. And this is where the pain starts. This is where I start hearing excuses on why they could not do something, why they would not be able to do something, why they could not, should not. And then that quickly goes into regret. Because as they're processing it in their own mind, coming out their own mouth, then they start saying things like, oh, I so could have done that. Oh, I so should have done that. Oh, how I wish I would have done that. So you may recognize that regret as the coulda, shoulda, woulda syndrome. So these discoveries were why I wrote my book, Untie Every Knot, little k, big N-O-T, to discover what knots are causing you to miss out, chicken out, or be counted out. When we keep our heart in the game, it drowns out the knots. So interestingly, what I've discovered is when listening to interviews or speeches by law enforcement officers, the vast majority of you always have known your purpose and calling. So many of you have always had a heart for this profession. And despite the evil and pain and injustice and brokenness that you see, the lies and the cries that you hear and the bitterness that you're forced to taste, you still have a heart to help and to serve and to protect, for peace, for hope, for truth and justice. You have a heart of kindness and compassion, of grace and grit. And you have a heart of a true hero, just like David. The heart is unbelievably powerful, holding the power to trump almost anything else. 4 years ago, while doing research on organ transplantation, I made a crazy discovery about the power of the heart. The story was so powerful, I included it too in my book. My research was because my sister was about to donate her kidney to her son, my nephew. And I wanted to learn more about kidney transplantation because she was going to recover at my home. But really, the only thing that I found interesting about kidney transplantation is when you get a new kidney, they don't remove the old one. They just kind of unhook it and push it to the side. So I don't know if it turns to a raisin. I'm not sure what happens to it. But that was the fascinating thing that I discovered about kidney transplantation. What I found extremely interesting was heart transplantation. And you see, for a heart transplant, sadly, the donor has passed, is no longer here. And so there were fascinating stories about how the recipients of these hearts picked up some of the characteristics of their donors. From easy things like, or simple things like food preferences, that before the surgery, they did not enjoy this particular food preference or cuisine, and afterwards they did, and would later discover that that was also a favorite cuisine of their donor. The same with music preferences. Literally, it shifted after they woke up with a new heart, which tells you there's a lot of music in our hearts. But two of my favorite stories was one where a little boy received a heart, and when he was recovering, his mother asked him, "How are things going?" And he looked her square in the eye and said, "Everything's copacetic, Mom." And she was shocked because he had never heard nor said that word before in his life. But come to find out, the donor said that a lot when she was trying to convince her family that everything is okay. But by far the most heart-wrenching story of heart transplant was a heart that was given to a little girl after another little girl was murdered. And the murder was unsolved. But when the little girl was recovering, she started having very vivid dreams about the murder, which she shared with her mother, who shared with law enforcement, which led to the arrest and the conviction of the killer. So important lesson number 4, never underestimate the power of your heart. So yes, all of you brave warriors, blessed peacemakers, and heroes behind the badge, you all are men and women after God's own heart. What you do with that really big deal is your choice. But just remember, you have not come this far to only come this far. Keep your heart in the game. And when you grow weary, don't give up, look up. The Bible promises that those who hope in the Lord will have renewed strength. And goes on to my favorite verse that says, you will soar on wings like eagles. You will run and not grow weary. You will walk and not be faint. It's not over. For some of you, regardless of your age, it hasn't even begun. And I want you, I don't care if you're 75 or 25, maybe your story hasn't really started yet. You know, Noah was 600 years old when he built the ark. So God has a plan for all of you. Chase him, and I promise he will make you stronger than ever before. Thank you, and may God bless the peacemakers. Good night.